Frank Reynolds stood in his modest kitchen, the aroma of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air, intertwining with the sweet memories of his past. At 74, he had lived a life full of experiences, some bitter, some sweet, but all shaping the man he had become. Today was his weekly trip to the supermarket, a ritual he cherished not only for the groceries, but for the familiar faces he encountered. As he carefully arranged the cookies on a plate, he couldn't help but reminisce about his days as a soldier. Those were the days, he muttered to himself, recalling the camaraderie shared with his fellow soldier. There was something extraordinary about the bond forged in the heat of battle, a mutual respect that transcended age and background. He remembered how they would rally around each other, sharing stories of home and dreams for the future during quiet moments, always looking out for one another. As he slid the plate into a basket, he envisioned the delighted faces of his grandchildren when they would visit later that afternoon. "They'll love these," he smiled at the thought. He grabbed his coat and headed out, his heart light with the anticipation of their laughter filling his home. Arriving at the supermarket, Frank felt a sense of comfort wash over him. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a familiar glow on the aisles he had traversed countless times. He nodded at Mrs. Thompson, who was busy picking out ripe tomatoes, and exchanged pleasantries with Mr. Jenkins, who was known for his tall tales about fishing trips gone awry. "Good to see you, Frank," Mrs. Thompson called out, her voice warm and welcoming. "You still baking those famous cookies?" "Only the best for my grandkids," Frank replied, his eyes twinkling with pride. He moved through the aisle, taking his time. The hustle and bustle of other shoppers rushed around him, but he remained an island of calm in the storm. He carefully selected items from the shelves, moving slowly to savor the moment, a stark contrast to the hurried pace of younger shoppers who seemed to dart past him like busy bees. Frank stopped at the dairy section, contemplating whether to get whole milk or almond milk. Just then, he noticed a young cashier, Tyler, who had just started working there a few months ago. Frank had seen him interact with customers before. The boy often wore a scowl, and his impatience was almost palpable. As he approached the checkout line, Frank felt a sense of unease creeping in, but he brushed it aside. After all, he was here to spread some joy with his cookies. When it was finally his turn at the register, Frank stepped forward with a warm smile. "Hello, Tyler. How are you today?" he asked, attempting to engage the young man. Tyler barely looked up from the register, rolling his eyes. "Can you just put your stuff down? I have a line here," he snapped, his tone sharp and dismissive. Frank's smile faltered, a wave of humiliation washing over him. He glanced around and noticed a few people in line chuckling at Tyler's remark. Despite the sting of embarrassment, Frank took a deep breath, reminding himself of the virtues he had learned during his service. "Actually, I forgot a bag of flour," he said, his voice steady. "You mind if I grab it quickly?" Tyler huffed, crossing his arm. "You old folks always forget something. You could have done it before getting in line," he muttered, eliciting a few more laughs from the customers waiting behind Frank. The laughter felt like daggers piercing through his composure, but Frank held onto his dignity. "I'll be right back," he said softly, turning away from the register. As he walked towards the baking aisle, his heart sank. It wasn't just the disrespect that hurt. It was the realization that someone so young could be so quick to judge. He picked up the flour, his hands trembling slightly as he fought back the emotions that threatened to spill over. In that moment, Frank made a silent promise to himself. He would not let this encounter define his day. He would not let it tarnish the joy he felt about his grandchildren or the love he had for his community. With each step back to the register, he reflected on the lessons of respect and compassion he had learned throughout his life. He hoped that perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way to share those lessons with Tyler, to help him understand the value of patience and kindness. Little did Frank know, this encounter would lead to a transformation far beyond his expectations, one that would not only impact Tyler, but also ripple through the entire supermarket. Frank Reynolds stood in the small office behind the supermarket, a place filled with the faint scent of fresh paint and the lingering aroma of baked goods from the deli. Michael, the store manager, leaned against his desk, concern etched across his face as he listened to Frank recount the humiliating encounter with the young cashier, Tyler. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a stark glow on the scene, emphasizing the gravity of their discussion. Stories like this remind us of the beauty in simple moments. Don't let it stop here. Subscribe, like, and share with your children and grandchildren. Let's pass these lessons forward. Michael, I've fought in battles where the stakes were life and death, Frank began, his voice steady yet tinged with emotion. But nothing prepared me for the disrespect I felt today. Not as a soldier, but as a person, an elderly person, no less. It's disheartening. He paused, the weight of his words sinking in as he pulled out his cherished eagle brooch from his pocket, its golden surface gleaming under the harsh light. This brooch was given to me by my comrades. It symbolizes honor and respect. I want you to have it, not as a token, but as a reminder of the values we should uphold, especially in a place like this. Michael accepted the brooch, his fingers brushing against the cool metal. Frank, I can't take this. It means too much to you, he insisted, though he understood the significance behind the gesture. No, you must, Frank replied firmly. It's time for a change, and I believe you can lead that change. You have the authority to shape how this store treats its customers, especially those who are often overlooked. Michael nodded slowly, moved by Frank's conviction. I'll do my best, but I think we need to have a conversation with Tyler. He needs to understand the impact of his words and actions. A few moments later, Tyler was summoned into the office, his demeanor exuding a mix of defiance and apprehension. He entered, arms crossed, and eyed Frank warily. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone bristling with an edge of arrogance. "Tyler," Michael began, his voice calm yet authoritative. "We need to talk about your behavior at the register earlier today. Frank here has something he'd like to share with." Tyler shrugged, unimpressed, but the opportunity to defend himself was quickly thwarted as Frank began to speak, his voice resonating with authority born from experience. "You might not know this, but I served in the military for many years. I've seen the best and worst of humanity. What I learned is that patience and respect are essential, especially when dealing with others. You may think it's funny to belittle someone because of their age, but those words can carry a heavy weight." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, the bravado fading as he listened. "I was just joking, man. It's not a big deal," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "It is a big deal," Frank pressed on, his gaze unwavering. "Every interaction matters. You never know the battles someone else is facing. The elderly deserve our respect, not our mockery." He moved closer, his eyes locking onto Tyler's. "I've met soldiers younger than you who have shown more respect than you did today. It's a choice you make every day, and it's time for you to choose wisely." As Frank's words sank in, Tyler's defenses began to crumble. There was an uncomfortable silence in the room, punctuated only by the distant sounds of shopping carts and chatter from customers outside. Michael watched closely, sensing the shift in Tyler's demeanor. "Look, I get it," Tyler finally said, his voice soft. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. I guess I just thought—" He trailed off, struggling to find the right word. "You thought it was harmless," Frank interjected gently, "but it's not just about intent. It's about how our words affect others. I've seen the consequences of thoughtless remarks, and I don't want you to go down that path." Tyler, now visibly shaken, looked away, his bravado completely gone. "I'm sorry, Frank. I didn't mean to hurt you or anyone else. I'll do better, I promise." Frank nodded, recognizing the sincerity in Tyler's voice. "That's all I ask. We all have room to grow. It's never too late to change." As they concluded their meeting, Michael felt a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps this encounter could lead to something greater, not just for Tyler, but for the entire store. The atmosphere had shifted, and the seeds of compassion and respect had been planted, ready to bloom into a new culture. The supermarket. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the supermarket began to shift dramatically. Tyler, the young cashier who had once dismissed Frank with a sardonic remark, now stood behind the register with a different demeanor. The lessons imparted by Frank had resonated deeply within him, igniting a flicker of compassion he had buried beneath layers of youthful arrogance. One afternoon, under the flickering fluorescent lights and amidst the buzz of shoppers, Tyler rang up a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Henderson. She approached the checkout with her cart filled with groceries, and as Tyler scanned her items, he noticed the wrinkles etched into her skin. Stories of a life well lived. "Thank you for your patience, Mrs. Henderson," he said, genuinely this time. "I hope you're having a good day." Mrs. Henderson looked up, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "Why, thank you, Tyler. It's nice to see a young person who still knows how to be polite," she replied, a smile breaking across her face. Tyler felt a swell of pride at her word. He was learning the beauty of respect, one interaction at a time. As he handed her the receipt, he added, "If you ever need help carrying your bag, just let me know. I'd be happy to assist." "Such a gentleman," she exclaimed, her eyes twinkling. "I'll take you up on that offer one day." In the break room later that afternoon, Tyler shared his experience with his coworkers, who had begun to notice the change in him. "You guys won't believe what happened today," he said, leaning against the counter with excitement. "Mrs. Henderson actually thanked me for being nice." His colleague Sarah raised an eyebrow, a hint of skepticism in her voice. "You? Nice? What happened to the Tyler we all know?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm serious. Ever since that talk with Frank, I've been trying to treat people with more respect. It feels good." Michael, the store manager, entered the break room at that moment, catching the tail end of the conversation. "I'm proud of you, Tyler. It takes a lot of courage to change and acknowledge your past mistakes." Tyler nodded, his expression earnest. "I just want to do better." Frank really opened my eyes to how important it is to treat everyone with kindness. Michael smiled, sensing the transformation in Tyler. "You've inspired not just yourself, but your co-workers as well. Keep it up, and soon this place will be known for its warm atmosphere." As the weeks passed, the ripple effect of Frank's wisdom spread throughout the supermarket. Other employees began to follow Tyler's lead, adopting a more pleasant and respectful attitude towards customers. Laughter filled the aisle, and patrons began to notice the change, commenting on the newly friendly service. One morning, as Frank entered the supermarket, he was greeted by a sign hanging above the entrance. "Respect is our most valuable currency," it read in bold letters. A smile crept across his face, filling him with a sense of pride. He had never intended to be a catalyst for change, but here he was, witnessing the positive impact of his brief encounter with Tyler. As he walked through the aisles, Frank noticed Tyler helping an elderly man reach for a jar on the top shelf. "Here, let me get that for you, sir," Tyler said, his tone warm and inviting. The man's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, young man. It's nice to see such kindness," the man replied, his voice filled with sincerity. Frank's heart swelled as he observed the young cashier interacting with customers, each exchange marked by a newfound respect. He approached the checkout line, where Tyler was now ringing up a mother with 2 small children. "Good to see you, Frank," Tyler said, his enthusiasm palpable. "How have you been?" "Much better now, thanks to you," Frank replied, his eyes twinkling. "I see the change in you, my friend." Tyler nodded, a hint of humility in his expression. "I owe it all to you, Frank. Your stories inspired me to be a better person. Just remember, it takes more than just words. Keep showing that respect in everything you do," Frank said, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. In that moment, their connection deepened, transcending the initial conflict that had brought them together. Frank felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing he had made a difference, not just in Tyler's life, but in the lives of all the customers who walked through those supermarket doors. The warmth that enveloped the store reinforced Frank's belief in the power of compassion. As he left the supermarket that day, he couldn't help but smile, feeling hopeful about the world around him, the changes unfolding in his community. The sun poured through the large windows of the supermarket, casting a warm glow over the aisles as Frank Reynolds walked in, his heart a little lighter than it had been in weeks. Ever since his encounter with Tyler, there had been a palpable change, not only in the young cashier, but also in the way the entire store felt. Customers seemed to smile more, and the chatter among shoppers was filled with a newfound warmth. Frank approached the checkout line where Tyler stood, a noticeable bounce in his step. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," Tyler greeted enthusiastically, a wide smile stretching across his face. "How are the grandkids doing?" "They're doing great, Tyler. Just got back from a camping trip with them. You wouldn't believe the stories I have to tell." Frank chuckled, feeling a surge of joy at the thought of sharing those stories with Tyler. "Camping, huh? Sounds like a blast." "I've always wanted to try that," Tyler replied, scanning Frank's items with a practiced ease. What did you all do out there?" As Frank recounted tales of fishing, campfires, and marshmallow roasting, he saw a spark of genuine interest in Tyler's eyes. It was as if their conversations had transformed into something meaningful, bridging the gap of age and experience. Tyler listened intently, nodding at the right moment, laughing at Frank's joke, and sharing a few stories of his own. "I've always admired how you treat everyone, Frank. You make it a point to know people's names and stories," Tyler said, leaning on the counter. "I've been trying to do that more, connecting with customers instead of just ringing them up." "That's wonderful to hear, Tyler. It's the little things that matter." "A kind word can make someone's day," Frank replied, placing a comforting hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Remember, we're all in this community together. Looking out for one another is what makes it special." Just then, an elderly woman approached the counter, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched a small basket filled with groceries. "Excuse me, young man," she said, her voice trembling. "Could you help me with this?" Without hesitation, Tyler turned his attention to her, swiftly moving around the register. "Of course, ma'am. What do you need help with?" As he assisted her, Frank watched with pride, noticing how Tyler was patient and kind, his demeanor a stark contrast to the young man he had once been. Subscribe today and become part of a community that values love, respect, and second chance. Like this video and share it with someone you care about. Let's grow this circle of compassion together. Thank you, dear. I just can't seem to lift these heavier items. My back isn't what it used to be." The woman sighed, her eyes softening as she looked at Tyler. "It's no trouble at all. Just take your time," Tyler replied, lifting a few items from her basket with ease. "You're doing great." As he helped her to her car, Tyler turned back to Frank, who was still at the counter, beaming. "I didn't realize how rewarding it could be to help someone like that. It really feels good," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "It does, doesn't it? That's the beauty of community," Frank replied, feeling a warmth spread in his chest. "We can all lift each other up, even in small ways." Tyler nodded, absorbing Frank's words. I've spent so much time focused on myself and my problems, I never thought about how much I could give back. It's easy to get lost in your own world. Life has a way of teaching us, especially through our mistakes," Frank said, his gaze steady on Tyler. "It's how we grow. Just remember, every small act of kindness ripples out into the world." As the day wore on, Frank noticed how Tyler continued to engage with other customers, offering assistance and chatting with those who passed through his lane. The atmosphere in the supermarket felt lighter, infused with laughter and warmth. It was a transformation that Frank had hoped for, and it was becoming a reality. Later, as Frank finished his shopping and headed for the exit, he bumped into a couple of regulars who had come to appreciate the shift in the store's environment. "Have you noticed the change around here?" one of them asked, a grin spreading across her face. "Tyler is a different person." Frank smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "He's learning, and he's doing a wonderful job." As he stepped outside, Frank took a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling hopeful. He had no idea how far this journey would take Tyler, but he was grateful to have been a part of it. The connection they were building was just the beginning, and Frank knew there were more lessons and stories to share. Walking home, he felt a sense of purpose, knowing that sometimes all it takes to change a life is a little understanding and a lot of compassion. As Tyler stood behind the register, he couldn't shake the weight of the conversations he had overheard earlier that day. Two customers, a middle-aged woman and an elderly man, had been discussing their struggles with rising costs and feeling invisible in a society that seemed to prioritize youth. Their words echoed in his mind, stirring a deep sense of reflection that had begun to blossom within him since his encounter with Frank. He leaned against the counter, staring blankly at the items being scanned, but his mind was elsewhere. "I can't believe how rude people can be," the woman had said, her voice tinged with frustration. "It's like we don't matter anymore." Tyler thought about how his past behavior had contributed to that very feeling. He remembered the days when he had smirked at older customers, dismissing their stories as irrelevant. Now, the thought made him feel sick. "I've been part of the problem," he muttered under his breath, feeling a resolve grow within him. He could do better. He would do better. Meanwhile, Frank was sitting at his kitchen table, an array of old photographs spread out before him. He looked at each one with a bittersweet smile as he contemplated a visit to the local veterans' home. He had been thinking about it for weeks, wanting to share his experiences and perhaps inspire the residents there, just as he had inspired Tyler. His heart swelled with the hope that his stories could bring warmth to those who might feel forgotten. "I should do it," Frank whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "There's so much to share, and they deserve to hear it." Just then, a glimmer of excitement caught his eye. A letter lay partially hidden beneath a pile of photographs. Curious, he picked it up, recognizing the familiar scrawl of his old comrade, Jim. Frank's heart raced as he opened the envelope, revealing news of a reunion for their old unit, memories of laughter, camaraderie, and the bonds forged in the heat of battle flooded back to him. Yet, alongside his excitement was a twinge of anxiety. "I haven't seen those guys in years," he thought, feeling a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. "Have I changed too much?" As he read through the details of the reunion, he felt a pang of longing for the brotherhood he had once cherished. It was a part of his life that had begun to feel distant, overshadowed by the daily rhythms of his quieter existence. He glanced up, noticing a framed photo of his grandchildren on the wall. "They'd love to hear my stories," he mused, the corners of his mouth lifting into a smile. Just then, a knock at the door startled him. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, bringing over a plate of freshly baked cookies. "Frank, I thought you might like a snack," she chirped, her warm smile brightening the dim light of his living room. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," he replied, accepting the plate gratefully. "You always know how to lift my spirit." As they chatted about the latest happenings in the neighborhood, Frank felt the stirrings of a plan forming. Perhaps he could intertwine his visit to the veterans' home with the reunion. He could share his journey with both the veterans and his grandchildren, bridging the gap between past and present. Meanwhile, Tyler was busy reorganizing the items on his checkout counter, his mind racing with thoughts of how to approach his interactions with customers differently. He envisioned himself greeting each person with kindness, ready to listen, not to dismiss them as he had before. "Hey, sir, how's your day going?" he practiced, a shy smile forming on his lips as he imagined the warmth of genuine connection. Just then, an elderly woman approached, her cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. Tyler straightened up, his heart beating a little fast. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you with anything today?" he asked, his voice steady and inviting. The woman looked up, surprised by his enthusiasm. "Well, thank you, dear. I was just looking for some help reaching that shelf up there," she said, pointing to a high shelf filled with products. "Absolutely! I've got you covered," Tyler replied, feeling a surge of purpose. He hurried over and grabbed the item she needed, handing it to her with a warm smile. "Here you go. Anything else I can help you with?" As the woman thanked him, Tyler realized that he was starting to feel the fulfillment he had longed for. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. And in that moment, he felt a flicker of hope that he could contribute changing the atmosphere not just in the store, but in the lives of the people around him. Back at Frank's home, the letter lay open next to the plate of cookies, a bridge connecting his past and future. It was a reminder that every moment, every interaction held the power to inspire change. Frank arrived at the veterans' reunion with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The familiar scent of polished wood and aged leather filled the air as he stepped into the community hall, adorned with flags and photographs that celebrated their shared history. He had arrived early, wanting to soak in the atmosphere and reconnect with the old friends who had once been like brothers to him. As he set up a small table with memorabilia from his time in service, he felt a sense of nostalgia wash over him. The laughter of fellow veterans echoed in the background, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the soft strumming of a guitar. Frank was eager to share his recent experience at the supermarket, where a simple encounter had transformed not just his life, but also the life of a young cashier named Tyler. He thought it was crucial to emphasize the importance of respect and understanding across generations, especially in a world that often seemed divided. When the room began filling up, Frank spotted a few familiar faces, their weathered features breaking into smiles as they approached. "Frank, you old warhorse, still baking cookies for the grandkids?" boomed Sam, a burly man with a heartwarming laugh. "Only the best for them, Sam. You know how it is," Frank replied, chuckling as he gestured to a plate of cookies he had brought along. "Want one?" "Can't say no to your cookie," Sam said, grabbing one and taking a hearty bite. "Just like the old days, eh?" Frank shared stories about the supermarket incident, how he had confronted disrespect with humility and strength. The veterans listened intently, nodding in agreement. "It's easy to get lost in our own lives and forget the lessons we learn," Frank said passionately. "Respect isn't just a courtesy, it's a necessity. We have to teach the younger generations that." As the evening progressed, Tyler, who had been invited by Michael, made his entrance. He scanned the room, feeling a wave of nervousness wash over him. Spotting Frank in conversation with a group of veterans, he felt a pull to approach. Tyler had spent the last few weeks reflecting on his past behavior and how it had impacted not just Frank, but the entire community. "Hey, Frank," Tyler said, his voice a bit shaky. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course, Tyler. Come on over," Frank replied, his eyes sparkling with warmth. "We were just talking about the importance of respect and how it plays a crucial role in our lives." Tyler nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about that since our last talk. It's been an eye-opener for me." Frank smiled. "Good to hear. We all have room to grow, don't we?" As the evening wore on, stories were exchanged, laughter filled the air, and camaraderie was rekindled. But then, in a twist that neither Frank nor Tyler could have anticipated, the reunion took a dramatic turn. A veteran named Jim, who had served alongside Frank, stood up to share a story from their mission. "Many of you may not know this, but Frank here was our commander during a pivotal mission years ago. He led us through some tough times, and I'm sure some of us wouldn't be here without his courage," Jim began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "And I'll tell you a little secret. Tyler, your grandfather was one of those men. He fought bravely, and Frank saved his life." Tyler's heart raced, and the room fell silent as realization dawned on him. He turned to Frank, eyes wide with shock. "My grandfather?" he whispered, overwhelmed. Frank nodded slowly, a bittersweet smile on his face. "He was a brave man, Tyler. I remember him well." Suddenly, the weight of his previous disrespect crashed down on Tyler. He felt a wave of guilt wash over him, and tears welled in his eyes. I had no idea. I treated you like you were nothing," he stammered, his voice breaking. "You saved my granddad. I'm so sorry, Frank." Frank stepped forward, pulling Tyler into a warm embrace. "It's okay, son. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you're learning and growing." The room erupted into applause, a testament to the power of understanding and redemption. As they parted, Tyler's face was streaked with tears, but a smile began to form. "Thank you for everything, Frank. I won't forget this," he said earnestly. Frank placed a reassuring hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Neither will I, Tyler. Let's continue to learn from each other." The reunion continued, filled with hope and a renewed sense of connection. Frank and Tyler stood together, united by their past and the promise of a brighter future, embodying the very lessons they had come to share. The atmosphere was electric with emotion, leaving everyone with a profound sense of hope and the realization that respect, compassion, and understanding could bridge any gap, no matter how wide. Want more stories that remind you of the true strength in humility and kindness? Our playlist is filled with heart-touching journeys of elderly men who turned humiliation into triumph. Don't miss out. Click to watch now.